Over 100 heads of state and government will make the trip to the UN's flagship event this year, albeit a bit delayed because of events in London on Monday. That does little to dilute the pressing challenges those leaders must grapple with when they eventually arrive here.
The General Assembly is meeting at a time of great peril. Geostrategic divides are the widest they have been since at least the Cold War. And they are paralyzing the global response to the dramatic challenges we face. Our world is blighted by war, battered by climate chaos, scared by hate, and shamed by poverty, hunger, and inequality.
He again reiterated his call for solidarity and cooperation, appeals made time and again that often fall on deaf ears in a world distracted by the multitude of challenges it faces.
The solidarity envisioned in the United Nations Charter is being devoured by the acids of nationalism and self-interest, by a shocking disregard for the poorest and most vulnerable in our world, by politicians who play to people's worst instincts for partisan gain, by prejudice, discrimination, misinformation and hate speech that pit people against one another, and by a global financial system that penalizes those with the least, by fossil fuel corporations killing the planet to rake in the most.
Key issues on the agenda this week include a summit on transforming education in response to the global crisis in learning laid bare by the COVID-19 pandemic, the general debate, a replenishment conference for the Global Fund to fight AIDS, tuberculosis and malaria, seeking to reach $18 billion, a plenary on the elimination of nuclear weapons, a ministerial meeting on Ukraine in the Security Council, and a jointly convened US, AU, EU Food Security Summit.
What we're hoping to do is really bring the world together to address all of the issues related to food insecurity. So it's bringing both the South as well as countries, developing countries and donor countries together in the room to address these issues and how we move forward.
As the UN seeks to expand funding for lower and middle income countries where some 700 million children remain out of school.
Piecemeal change, no longer an option. It's a once-in-a-generation opportunity for us to radically transform education, making it fit for purpose. The international community coming together to reverse the slide on the progress of SDG 4 and to begin to sow the seeds for a much deeper transformation of learning.
During a period where wedge issues from Ukraine to vaccine inequity, climate financing and Security Council reform will also feature prominently.
The mural behind me by Brazilian artist Eduardo Cobra will welcome delegates to this year's meetings, a colourful display about climate change and our stewardship of the planet, raising questions about what kind of world we will be leaving for future generations. And as the UN Secretary General has said, this year's general debate must be about hope and overcoming divisions that have so dramatically impacted our world. Sherwin Bryce-Pease, SABC News, New York.